Hello, everyone, and welcome to Theology with Coffee. Little bit of a different format today. It's just me here in my office, and so I'm going to be Kelson's out of town, so I'm going to be doing the episode solo today. We are not going to continue with Revelation. We're going to do something that you might consider, you could call Revelation adjacent, and we're going to be doing a study on the beast, the court, and the kingdom from Daniel chapter 7. Why Daniel chapter 7? Why did I pick Daniel chapter 7? Well, where we're about to be going in the book of Revelation, we're about to look at Revelation chapter 4 and 5. And we're getting into what I refer to as the apocalypse section of the book of Revelation. We have already talked about in our study of Revelation how heavily John leans upon, reincorporates, and even expands upon different Old Testament passages. He uses a lot from the books of Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Psalms, and Zechariah. But the book that he uses the most by ratio is in fact the book of Daniel. And indeed, in the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 7 in particular is very important to the book of Revelation, to understanding the book of Revelation. So much so, in fact, that I've said in the past, and I still think that this is true, you cannot have an understanding of Revelation if you do not understand the background of Daniel chapter 7. As John is writing Revelation, he expects his audience, he expects his readers to know Daniel chapter 7 really, really, really well. And so we're going to be taking a look at Daniel chapter 7 today. Now, the design of this episode is that it's going to be a standalone episode. So you don't need to have listened to any of our Revelation episodes. And what I'm going to talk about today, I'm not really going to reference Revelation a whole lot. I really just want to stick to Daniel chapter 7. But I will say this, for future episodes of Theology with Coffee, as we get into Daniel chapter 4 and 5, when we get to Daniel chapter 13, it's going to be very helpful to listen to this episode so that you have a background for a lot of the stuff that's going to pop up in the book of Revelation. So with that, that's probably the last time that I'm going to really talk about Revelation directly. But right now we want to jump in and we want to deal with Daniel chapter 7. Now, a little bit of history here and a little bit of, I want to discuss a little bit overall the book of Daniel, because it's a really fascinating book and it's a really fascinating history. The prophet Daniel lived through one of the most tumultuous periods of history. He saw the rise and fall of some of the greatest superpowers this earth has ever known, and he lived during a very difficult time in which his own homeland was invaded. Daniel lives during the expansion and really the height of the Babylonian Empire. During Daniel's lifetime, the Babylonians conquer the southern kingdom of Judah. And as a part of their conquering, what they would do is they would take the young men of the nation that they conquered, in particular young nobles, young royals, those who had education, those who had power. They would deport them from their homeland, bring them back to Babylon. They would castrate them and have them serve in the Babylonian courts, learning Babylonian customs, even changing their names. This is exactly what happens to Daniel as a young man. Indeed, it happens to Daniel and three of his friends, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, who we know better by their Babylonian names, that their names are changed to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So Daniel and his friends end up in the land of Babylon. They end up in what is essentially a form of servitude there in Babylon. But despite this, God blesses them, and because of their faithfulness in this very hostile land, God actually gives them quite a bit of authority. For Daniel himself, it turns out that he has a very unique God-given gift to interpret dreams and visions. And when he is still young and in the court of King Nebuchadnezzar, really the greatest king of Babylon, the king who oversaw their golden age. King Nebuchadnezzar has dreams that none of his wise men can interpret, and so Daniel is brought forward, and Daniel is then someone who is able to interpret these dreams, much like Joseph was rescued from prison in the book of Genesis because of his ability to interpret Pharaoh's dreams. Something similar happens with Daniel. Now, Daniel not only interprets Nebuchadnezzar's dreams, but he also interprets the dreams of other Babylonian kings like Belshazzar, who is one of the last kings of Babylon. And through this, Daniel actually grows in great prominence in the kingdom of Babylon, to one point being the third most important official in this entire nation. But Daniel also sees not only the Babylonian Empire at its golden age, but he sees the fall of the Babylonian Empire as the Persian Empire actually comes in and takes control. And it's after the Persians take control, when Daniel is an old man, that perhaps the most famous story that we know from the book of Daniel, the story of Daniel in the lion's den, actually occurs. When Daniel is very old at this point, he spent most of his life living in captivity in a foreign land. And when the Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians are long gone and been conquered by the Persians, that's actually when the Persian king is sort of tricked into making this edict that no one should be allowed to pray to their God. And Daniel is then captured and thrown into the lion's den. And we know that story about how God rescues Daniel through his faithfulness at that time. All these narratives, all these stories really happen in the first half of the book of Daniel, the first 6 chapters. The second half of the book of Daniel loops back in on itself and then begins telling a number of visions that Daniel himself has and the interpretations of those visions. The most important of these, and what really serves as the backbone of the entire book of Daniel, is the vision of Daniel chapter 7. Daniel has this vision late in the time of Babylon. In fact, the Babylonian Empire is very close to falling. King Belshazzar is the ruler of Babylon, and Belshazzar, who sort of makes a mess of the kingdom. He enjoys partying more than he enjoys running a kingdom. He's the last and the weakest king of the Babylonians whenever the Persians come in and pretty much overnight sweep away the Babylonian regime. It's during this twilight time of the Babylonian Empire that Daniel actually has this vision that we find here in Daniel chapter 7. So with that as kind of a background for you, and I know for many of you that's just going to be review, but that kind of gives you a background. What I want to do is I actually want to read through all of chapter 7. It's a long chapter, but I want to read all the way through it. And this is a chapter that literally I could spend a series going through. I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to pick up on three, in particular, 3 different images from this book. I'm going to talk about those images and how they relate to Daniel's vision of the day of the Lord and how God is going to bring human history to an end and restore the kingdom. That's what Daniel chapter 7 is all about. It's the restoration of the Messianic kingdom. So I'm going to deal with these 3 different images as we listen through. I'm going to talk about the image of the beast and the horn of the beast. I'm going to talk about the image of the courts, and specifically the heavenly courts or the angelic courts. And I'm going to talk about the image of the kingdom of the Son, or the kingdom of the Messiah that is coming. And so that's going to be where we focus our study this morning. So let me begin. I'm going to read all the way through. Please follow along with me if you have your Bible, if you're listening to the car or something. Just listen along and we'll get through this. So, Daniel chapter 7, verse 1. In the first year of King Belshazzar of Babylon, Daniel had a dream with visions in his mind as he was lying in his bed. He wrote down the dream, and here is the summary of his account. Daniel said, "In my vision at night I was watching, and suddenly the 4 winds of heaven stirred up the great sea. 4 huge beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion, but had eagle's wings. I continued watching until its wings were torn off. It was lifted up from the ground and set on its feet like a man and given a human mind. Suddenly another beast appeared, a second one, that looked like a bear. It was raised up on one side with 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, "Get up, gorge yourself on flesh." After this, while I was watching, suddenly another beast appeared. It was like a leopard with 4 wings of a bird on its back. It had 4 heads, and it was given dominion. After this, while I was watching in the night visions, suddenly a 4th beast appeared, frightening and dreadful and incredibly strong, with large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed, and it trampled with its feet whatever was left. It was different from all the beasts before it, and it had 10 horns. While I was considering the horns, suddenly another horn, a little one, came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. And suddenly in this horn there were eyes like the eyes of a human, and a mouth that was speaking arrogantly. As I kept watching, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white like snow, and the hair of his head was like whitest wool. His throne was flaming fire, and its wheels were blazing fire. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from his presence. Thousands upon thousands served him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was convened, and the books were opened. I watched. Then, because of the sound of the arrogant words of the horn that he was speaking, as I continued watching, the beast was killed and its body destroyed and given over to a burning fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was removed, but an extension of life was granted to them for a certain period of time. I continued watching in the night visions, and suddenly one like a son of man was coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was escorted before him. He was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, so that those of every people, nation, and language should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will not be destroyed. Verse 15. As for me, Daniel, my spirit was deeply distressed within me, and the visions of my mind terrified me. I approached one of those who was standing by and asked him to clarify all this. So he let me know the interpretation of these things. These huge beasts, 4 in number, are 4 kings who will rise from the earth. But the holy ones of the Most High will receive the kingdom and possess it forever, yes, forever and ever. Then I wanted to be clear about the 4th beast, the one different from all the others, extremely terrifying with iron teeth and bronze claws, devouring, crushing, and trampling with its feet whatever was left. I also wanted to know about the 10 horns on its head and about the other horn that came up before which 3 fell, the horn that had eyes and a mouth and spoke arrogantly and that looked bigger than the others. As I was watching, this horn waged war against the holy ones and was prevailing over them until the Ancient of Days arrived and a judgment was given in favor of the holy ones of the Most High, for the time had come and the holy ones took possession of the kingdom. This is what he said. The 4th beast will be a 4th kingdom on the earth, different from all other kingdoms. It will devour the whole earth, trample it down, and crush it. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will rise from this kingdom. Another king, different from the previous ones, will rise after them and subdue 3 kings. He will speak words against the Most High and oppress the holy ones of the Most High. He will attend to change religious festivals and laws, and the holy ones will be handed over to him for a time, times, and half a time. But the court will convene, and his dominion will be taken away to be completely destroyed forever. The kingdom, dominion, and greatness of the kingdoms under all the heaven will be given to the people, the holy ones of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all his rulers will serve and obey him. This is the end of the account. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts terrified me greatly, and my face turned pale, but I kept the matter to myself. All right, so Daniel chapter 7. Wow, what an image, right? What a vision. This is the kind of chapter that a lot of people will read and they're just like completely spooked. And I love Daniel's response at the end here. It says that he was terrified greatly and his face turned pale. And boy, I tell you what, anyone who reads this passage of scripture and doesn't have the same response, well, I don't know what's wrong with you. It's a terrifying image. And I just want to walk through this passage. And as I said, I wanted to focus on these three different images. First of all, Daniel starts with this vision of these four beasts that come up from the sea. Now, traditional views of what these beasts are, later the angel explains that these are kings or kingdoms that will rise upon the earth. Traditional views of that identify these four kingdoms would identify these four kingdoms as that of Babylon, Persia, Greece, although it'd be more proper to refer to this as the Hellenistic or the Macedonian Empire of Alexander the Great, and then the Empire of Rome being the last one of these. There's a couple reasons, though, why I think that that's a very flawed interpretation, and that in fact, these four beasts here they are not meant to reflect these historical empires that we traditionally think of. First of all, let's start with some external evidence. While it sounds really neat and tidy to talk about Babylon, Persia, really it's the Medo-Persian Empire, followed by this Greek confederation, and then by the Empire of Rome. History is not nearly as neat as what biblical interpreters usually try to paint this picture as. The fact is that especially after the fall of the Persian Empire, it is a very chaotic time, and really there is no such thing as a unified Greek empire. The Greeks are a series of city-states and confederations, and very quickly after the fall of Alexander the Great, his empire is divided up into four, and really it's two prominent empires of the Ptolemies in Egypt and the Seleucids in Syria. Another issue here historically is that there is a lot of emphasis placed upon Daniel of this fourth kingdom and how it is different, more brutal, worse than all of these other empires. And that just doesn't fit the Empire of Rome. Rome was certainly a brutal empire, but for a lot of history, particularly in between the Old and New Testament, Rome was actually an important ally to the Israelites and to their people. In fact, if it weren't for Rome, the Seleucids likely would have sacked and destroyed Jerusalem and destroyed Israel. Israel gains independence only because of the alliance it makes with the Roman Empire. It's actually very recent, very close to the New Testament, that Rome becomes the great threat that it actually is at the time of the New Testament. And even then, if we take the Roman Empire, if we say, okay, the Roman Empire was powerful, it was brutal, would we really say that the Roman Empire is more evil than any other empire that's ever existed on this earth? It was evil, it was corrupt to be sure, but it was just another human kingdom. We also see here several references in the text that these four kingdoms aren't following one after another. Okay, the kingdom of Babylon never exists at the same time that the kingdom of Rome does. In history, these are sequential empires. But in this text, the four beasts that are described actually exist at the same time. In fact, later on in this vision, he talks about how after the fourth beast is destroyed, the first three, their authority, their dominion is taken away, but they continue to exist, apparently as semi-independent kingdoms after this period of time. Well, after the fall of Rome, I got news for you. Babylon, Persia, and the Greek Confederation did not exist in any form after the fall of the Roman Empire. Another kind of internal evidence as we look at this text, notice what sparks the fall of the fourth empire. What actually brings about its fall? It's not what we would consider the first coming of the Messiah. In other words, it's not the Messiah's birth, it's not the ministry of Jesus on this earth that actually brings an end to this fourth empire, but it is the second coming of the Messiah. In this, what is portrayed as the Son of Man coming in the clouds to receive glory and honor. At Jesus' trial before the Sanhedrin, when they're asking him if he is going to overthrow the Romans, if he's a king, he answers them by quoting this passage and saying that this is something that has not yet happened. It's still in the future. So in other words, sometime after the resurrection of Jesus Christ is when this event happens. Well, I got news for you. The fall of the Roman Empire is not connected either to the first or the second coming of the Messiah, of Jesus Christ. And so it really stretches the text beyond what it can sustain to claim that these four empires are historical empires, and in particular, it really stretches the text to try to argue that the fourth beast is the Roman Empire. Instead, what I think makes a lot more sense is that these four kingdoms that are portrayed here by Daniel are kingdoms that are in Daniel's distant future. And again, this vision is primarily concerned not with the Messiah's first coming, but is actually concerned with the Messiah's second coming. This is a post-resurrection prophecy. This is something that is going to occur and take place after the resurrection. Therefore, these four kingdoms would not connect to anything that Daniel would have known in his day. And indeed, I don't think they connect directly to any empires that we have yet seen on this earth. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the nature of these beasts, because there's a lot of poetry that goes into it. Notice how these are portrayed as these monstrous amalgamations. Now, they are different, they are taken as different animals that we know from the natural world, and they are sort of mashed up, abomination, corrupted versions of those. The first three beasts in particular seem to be something that is natural and yet corrupted and monstrous at the same time. These three first beasts, these represent not only future kingdoms, but I would say just broadly and generally, these three kingdoms that come out of the chaotic sea. These are really represent all human kingdoms, all human empires that put themselves in opposition to God's law, to God's decrees. Another way of saying this is anytime a nation turns its back on God, anytime a nation decides to worship created things rather than the Creator, it becomes like these beasts. All right, so that's the quality that that nation takes on, as it takes on this beast-like quality. What do we notice about these beasts? Well, they are very violent, first of all. These are beasts that sort of grow their empire and grow their influence through violence, through war, through conquering, through devouring, crushing, mauling all of their opponents. That's how they grow in their dominance across this world. The other thing we notice about these beasts is that they are incredibly arrogant. These are beasts that set themselves up as gods in and of themselves. This is an example of the state demanding that people worship the state and depend upon the state and love the state over and above loving and obeying and worshiping God. When states do this, they become like these beasts that are so arrogant and self-consumed and prideful. The third thing I want you to notice about these beasts is the way that they are sort of corrupt versions of good things that God has created. The nature of these beastly cultures and these beastly kingdoms is that they corrupt, they flip upside down, they take what God has made and they turn it into an abomination. And so beast-like cultures or beast-like kingdoms are kingdoms that violate God's ethical commands. They're kingdoms that take God's commands to love your neighbor, to care for others, and they may flip those things upside down. Again, do we see this in kingdoms and nations today? Well, you better believe it. When we have nations that legalize and celebrate the murder of infants, this is a beastly act. This is a monstrous act. And these nations become like these monsters, and leaders that support things like abortion become like these beastly monsters here. We also see this in what's happening with sexual ethics across, in particular, Western culture right now. When we take what God has said about men and women and marriage and we corrupt it, we turn it upside down, we practice abominations like transgenderism and homosexuality, what happens? We're playing the part of these beasts. We're playing the part of these monsters. And again, what this text is saying is that any leader, any nation that adopts these things that are so opposed to God's law, they are like these beasts that come out of the sea of chaos, because they are setting themselves up as a law unto themselves. Now, these first three beasts, Daniel is able to find sort of comparisons to make with the natural world. This tells you that these first three beasts are sort of kingdoms as we understand these kingdoms. They would certainly include, kingdoms like Babylon and like Persia would be versions of these beasts. The kingdoms that exist today in our world, the nations that exist today, would be like these beasts. They are things that we have seen. And yet in the future, I believe that these are going to be three kingdoms, three nations that do arise in the future, that their conquering ways sort of set the stage for the fourth kingdom. Now let's turn to the fourth, because while Daniel comes up with natural creatures, lions, bears, leopards, to talk about these first three beasts, the fourth beast is so monstrous, so terrible, so opposed to God, that it is a completely horrific, fantastical monster that has no connection to any natural occurring beast. This is now a kingdom which is so evil, so monstrous, so upside down in its moral ethics, that it is a literal mutant or monster that cannot actually be defined by the natural world. And Daniel is saying this fourth one, okay, is unlike any of the others. In fact, that's the interpretation that the angel gives. The angel says, look, there's going to be these three kingdoms that are really bad. But as bad as these three kingdoms are, as bad as the most evil nations that you've ever heard of, right? The Nazis in Germany, the communists, the Soviet Union in Russia, the communist regime in China, as bad as any regime you've ever heard of, this fourth beast is going to be worse by many factors. It's going to be much more evil than any of these others. And most of the attention is actually turned to talking about this fourth beast. Now, in addition to the fourth beast, Daniel goes on to describe the horns that grow from this beast. These horns are pictures and images of the kings or the rulers of this beast. So he's giving us a bit of a narrative here to go along with it. Apparently what's going to happen is you're going to have these three kingdoms that really do a lot of evil in this world. And then you're going to have a fourth kingdom grow. And from this fourth kingdom, you're going to have a series of 10 kings that really consolidate its power. But at some point, there's going to be a ruler who starts as a little horn, who starts as insignificant, but actually stages some sort of an insurrection or coup to overthrow 3 of those 10 kings. And he is going to be the dominant power of this fourth beast. So the beast is the kingdom. The horn is the ruler of this kingdom. And indeed, this is one of our first and most important passages in the Bible that deals with the Antichrist. If you've heard my study on Genesis, you know that actually I think the first Antichrist type that we find in Scripture is actually Nimrod from Genesis chapter 10. But this is another Antichrist passage that we get. Now, Daniel doesn't use the term Antichrist. In fact, the term Antichrist Antichrist isn't really used in relation to this figure very often. Here he's called the horn, or the head of the beast. In the book of Revelation, this same figure is just called the beast. He is identified with the kingdom, and he's just called the beast of the sea. In 2 Thessalonians, he's called the man of lawlessness. These are different terms that titles that this figure has, that all of them point to what in Christian theology you often hear of as the Antichrist. So this figure will arise as the human ruler of this vicious, horrible, terrible empire. Of course, when John is expanding on Daniel's vision, he's actually going to say that the power and the authority that the Antichrist wields is going to come from Satan himself. And that's another important factor that we need to know about not only this fourth kingdom, but all four of these kingdoms. They are all backed by powerful, evil, dark, spiritual forces. This is why Daniel chooses these monstrous images to describe them. These are all beasts of chaos, spirits of chaos, and they all have the backing of very dark, spiritual forces. This fourth beast in itself has the backing of the dragon, the serpent, Satan himself. This is where the authority and the power of the little horn, or the Antichrist, actually comes from. Now, this beast, what does he do? Well, again, Daniel doesn't give us a lot of detail, but what he does tell us is that one of the main programs or main agendas of the fourth monster here is to destroy what he calls the holy ones. So the point is to destroy the holy ones, to go to war with the faithful family of God. So understand, Daniel is laying out this vision of the future that before the Messiah returns, before Jesus Christ comes, there is going to be this great evil empire. And ruling this empire for a period of time, there is going to be this Antichrist figure, this horn. Now, there's a lot of disagreement over how long this figure's authority will last. Will it be 7 years? Will it be 3.5 years? Is it going to be an indeterminate amount of time? I'm not going to get into all of that now, but just know that he will have authority for a period of time. It is a limited period of time. It is a time that God himself will put a stop to. And one of the things that he will do, one of the ways that he will use his authority is to go after, to attack, to try to destroy the faithful family of God. Now, Daniel doesn't have the vocabulary to use the word church or Christian or believers, which is why he uses this term holy ones. But when you look at how this word holy ones is actually used in the New Testament, it's the Greek word hagios. And almost always the term hagios applies to the church, to believers in Jesus Christ. And so the writers of the New Testament, including John, who wrote the book of Revelation, when reflecting upon Daniel chapter 7, when they ask the question, who are being persecuted here, they would tell you it's the church. It's the faithful believers in Jesus Christ who are being persecuted and attacked by this beast and by the ruler of the beast. So this individual makes it his primary program for the world to worship him. And if the world is going to worship him, what he has to do is he has to get rid of the church. He has to get rid of believers. And so part of his agenda is intense persecution. The angel, when interpreting this vision, actually warns Daniel, and he says, look, for a period of time, the holy ones, the church, the believers, they are going to be handed over to the beast and to the horn. And it's going to look like they're losing. For a period of time, it's going to be really, really bad as this beast devours, crushes, tramples, destroys the holy ones. Again, verse 25, it says, of the horn, he will speak words against the Most High and oppress the holy ones of the Most High. He will change religious festivals and laws, and the holy ones will be handed over to him for a time, times, and half a time. And so the basic idea of that passage is that the world is going to see persecution as we've never seen it before. This means that another character of these beasts is that these beasts hate the church and hate the kingdom of God. Okay, so remember these characteristics that I've been talking about. I've talked about how the beasts are violent nations. I've talked about how they are nations that are proud and arrogant, and they aggrandize themselves and even demand. They are states that demand people to depend upon them and to worship them. They are states that are controlled and influenced by dark spiritual powers. They are nations that take the law of God, that take the word of God, and they corrupt it and they flip it upside down. They call what is good bad and what is bad good, and they attack the very basis of God's will through the family. They even attack marriage itself. Marriage is between one man and one woman, and these nations make it their intention to change that, to destroy that. And then the final thing here that's really important is that these beasts attack and seek to cancel, silence, destroy, persecute the church. Now, as I describe all of that, you might be saying, well, gee, Pastor, it sure sounds like we're living under the control of one of these beasts today. And you're absolutely right. I think that's the point of the book of Daniel, and that's why he doesn't give a lot of details here. The point is that every generation of believers will experience to some level what's going on here. Because until Jesus Christ returns, this world is under the dominion of Satan. And Satan is constantly trying to raise up these nations, or to corrupt what were good nations and turn them against the church and turn them against God. And so we actually see this playing out. That's why when you read passages like this, you shouldn't just read this and say, well, this is some far off passage that only is relevant to the Christians that are living during the last 7 years of the tribulation, or something like that. No, this is for every generation of believer, because every generation of believers will live under the influence, under the dominance of a beast, until we get to this final, most monstrous, most evil, most dark, most violent, most backwards beast, which is the final beast and the Antichrist who rules that beast. So, for a time, things are going to be really, really bad. But the point of Daniel chapter 7 is not to depress you, it's not to scare you, it's not to get you worried. The point of Daniel chapter 7 is actually to bring encouragement. The point of Daniel chapter 7 is actually to for you to see that even despite all of this, God is in control. And that's where we get to the second major image, which is the image of the courts. It mentions the courts twice here. It says at first, we see mentioning the courts here in verse 14. It says his dominion, I'm sorry, no, not verse 14. It says verse 10. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from his presence. That's the Ancient of Days. Thousands upon thousands served him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was convened and the books were opened. It mentions these courts again, I believe here at the very end, in verse 26, yeah. But the court will convene and his dominion will be taken away. That's the beast and the horn, to be completely destroyed forever. So what's the point? What's this saying is things are going to get really bad on this earth. The kingdoms are going to become more and more monstrous. They're going to become more and more like these beasts, until you have this terrible and awful fourth beast that arises upon the earth to have this kind of dominance led by the Antichrist. At some point, though, he will be defeated. It says that God is going to put an end to all evil. And just like he does in Genesis chapter 6, God is going to come and judge the earth. He's going to judge not only wicked humans, but also the wicked spiritual forces that are influencing the rebellion in this earth. And notice how it describes the Ancient of Days. This is another title for God the Father. It says he sits on his throne, but notice it's not just one throne that is present there, is it? It says thrones were set in place. What is the point of these thrones? Well, it tells us later that he is accompanied by thousands upon thousands, 10,000 by 10,000 who serve him, and that there is a court that convenes. Today in the Protestant church, in sort of our denominations, we don't talk a lot about angels. Our view of angels is actually a very low view. But angels are really important in the Bible, and this is just one of the scenes where angels play a very important role. What role do angels play? Angels are rulers, they are judges, they are the executors of the will of God. And here, these angels sit upon these thrones to judge the earth. These are the loyal council members of God who sit to judge the earth and judge these wicked spiritual forces and wicked human rebels. It says that the court here convenes, and as they convene, they finally mete out this judgment against the fourth beast after all of the chaos that has been caused across this earth. And there's the statement here that the beast, he's like an animal that dies in a field, and you take the corpse and you throw it on a flame. That's the image that it uses. And so this terrible monster that was so terrifying and so seemed invincible. The moment that God shows up, this beast is defeated and its corpse is thrown on the fire. Now, how does this happen? What's the mechanics of this? Daniel doesn't give us a lot of detail here, but he does say that the defeat of the fourth beast is specifically tied to the revelation of this divine figure called the Son of Man. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Son of Man when I get to the third image of the kingdom, but just understand this: the Son of Man would have been the visible Yahweh. In the Old Testament, it often portrays Yahweh as being two persons. There is the invisible Yahweh who rules in heaven, and there is the visible Yahweh that people interact with here on this earth. The Son of Man, then, is the visible Yahweh who is now incarnate as a human. And this human who is a Davidic king who now has the rights over the kingdom to rule on earth, to rule both as fully God and fully man, he is now presented in this beautiful vision. And it is through his arrival that the wicked beast is then destroyed. Now again, when Jesus is asked, when does this occur? He doesn't say it comes with his first coming. He says it's going to arrive with his second coming. After the resurrection is when this occurs, which again is an indication to you that this isn't talking about Rome. This is talking about something that has not yet occurred. This is talking about the return of Jesus Christ, the second coming of Jesus Christ. John in Revelation gives a little bit more detail. He describes what this is going to be. And unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, it's not going to be like the movies where there's this big, massive battle that happens. No, John says that the Son of Man, the Messiah, is going to show up at his second coming, and with the breath of his mouth, he's going to destroy the beast and the dragon and all of their forces. They're going to be completely destroyed. Jesus will show up, literally go, and all the armies of darkness, all the enemies of darkness will be immediately wiped out at the second coming of Jesus Christ. Daniel doesn't have the vocabulary for that yet. Daniel's living several hundred years before Jesus has been born, but that's exactly what he's describing. And when the New Testament authors reflect upon Daniel 7, that's what they're seeing in Daniel 7. They're seeing this talk about the second coming of Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ coming to be the head of the court of angels, the head of God's council, the co-ruler with God is the Son, Jesus Christ, who now sits as authority over heaven and as the authority over earth. And these angels who sit in the courts that I told you, these angels are awesome, they are powerful, they are judges, they are rulers, they are executors of the will of God. They actually fall on their knees and they worship the Messiah, the Son of Man, the Son of God, because he is so glorious and he is so mighty. That brings us then to the third image that I want to talk about in Daniel chapter 7, which is the image of the kingdom. Now, Daniel does something really clever with the kingdom. Notice when the Son of Man appears, it says, he, the Son of Man, was given dominion and glory and a kingdom so that those of every people, nation, and language should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will not be destroyed. Now, in a couple verses, it actually says that when he receives this kingdom, the fourth beast is destroyed, but the other three beasts continue to exist, only now with limited influence and power. So, verse 17, these huge beasts, four in number, four kings will rise from the earth, but the holy ones of the Most High will receive the kingdom. Sorry, that's the wrong verse. I had that marked. Let's see, where is it? Well, I lost it here for a second. I'll find it here in a second. But the thing I wanted to point out to you again, you probably heard it the first time I read through it, is that when the fourth beast is destroyed, the other three beasts are actually allowed to continue for a period of time. So what that means is that when Jesus Christ comes back and establishes his kingdom, there is a period of time in which the Son, the Messiah, rules here on this earth, and yet there are other kingdoms that exist at the same time. The Son ruling over them in dominion, but those kingdoms also existing with some level of independence as they continue. I really want to read that passage to you. Let's see. Oh, yeah, I just went too far. Verse 12. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was removed, but an extension of life was granted to them for a certain period of time. So there you go. Now, I think, and we'll debate this when we get further on in our study of Revelation, but I think that probably what's being described here is the millennium kingdom. That's why these beasts continue to exist for a period of time, apparently on some kind of a probation for the evil that they've caused, is that this is something to do with the millennium kingdom as the Son of Man is now ruling from the city of Jerusalem. That's kind of a topic for another day, though. Let's continue to talk about this kingdom, though. Because notice that the king, the Son of Man, is given this kingdom. But I want you to listen to, first of all, what it says in verse 18. It says, the holy ones of the Most High. Now, who are the holy ones? They're believers. They're the church. They're the followers of Jesus Christ. They will receive the kingdom and possess it forever and ever. So he's saying that those who were the persecuted ones, those who the beasts were trying to destroy and kill, when the Son of Man returns, actually what he will do is he will put them in place to rule the other beasts. He actually says this again in verse 27. The kingdom, dominion, and greatness of kingdoms under all of heaven will be given to the people, the holy ones of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will serve and obey him. So I don't want you to miss the fact that when the Son of Man comes in the clouds, and again, I'm identifying that with the second coming of Jesus Christ, part of what he does is, yes, he establishes his kingdom, but he actually takes believers, those who are faithful to him, and he puts them on thrones to serve as members of his council as he rules over the earth. What this means is that believers in Jesus Christ are actually given authority that is similar to that of the angels who serve on the council of God. We are glorified and included in God's family as co-rulers with our big brother, Jesus Christ. This idea is actually the background to certain passages in the New Testament. For example, in 1 Corinthians, when John actually says that believers will judge angels or judge spiritual beings. The background of that is Paul knows his Old Testament. He knows Daniel chapter 7, and he knows that part of what Jesus Christ is going to do is he's going to take his human family, they will be glorified, and they will be made co-rulers with him over this earth, the way that God designed it originally in the garden before sin and darkness separated us from him. So that's the kingdom that he brings. Now, when the angel is summarizing all of Daniel 7, what he says in verse 17 and 18. This is kind of the thesis statement of what Daniel 7 is all about. He says, "These huge beasts, four in number, are four kings who will rise from the earth. But the holy ones of the Most High will receive the kingdom and possess it forever. Yes, forever and ever." So, what is the main idea of Daniel chapter 7? The main idea of Daniel chapter 7 is two things. First, it's going to be really bad for a short period of time. For those who put their trust in Jesus Christ, for the church, for believers in Him, for a short period of time, it's going to be really bad. And again, when I read passages like this, I don't think that this is just something that refers to a far off future. I think every generation of believer lives under the reign of a beast of some sort. And while we're here on this earth, we are going to experience suffering. We're going to experience persecution. We're going to be canceled. We're going to be pressured. We may even be killed. Even though we go through that for a short period of time there, notice the promise. The kingdom of Christ will last forever. How long is forever? It's never ending. Okay? There is a limit to the amount of time that the beasts have authority and have power on this earth. There is no limit to the amount of time that Jesus Christ will reign. And we, His people, His family, will reign alongside them. So when we think about end times, we really shouldn't be fearful. We shouldn't be afraid. We shouldn't be pessimistic, but we should understand that it's always darkest before the dawn, that things are going to get really bad for a short period of time, but they're going to be really, really good forever. And how do you access this really good forever? It's through Jesus Christ. He is the only way to receive the forgiveness of your sins and citizenship in this coming kingdom. That means right now on this earth, you have two responsibilities. The first one is to repent and turn your life over to Jesus Christ. Make Him your king. If you do, your citizenship is assured, your glorification is promised, and when the books are opened, you will be declared righteous, not because of your good works, but because of what Jesus Christ accomplished for you on the cross. But there's a second responsibility. For those of us here on this earth, we are called salt and light. We are the bringers of the kingdom of God. The church should be the closest thing to heaven that you find here on this earth. And part of our purpose here is to drive back that spiritual darkness, to engage in spiritual warfare, to see souls saved so that others can become members of that kingdom as well. We have a responsibility on this earth to fight back against the influence of the beasts. We have a responsibility, even though we know there's going to be pressure, to stand up, to be bold, to vote, to speak our mind, to speak truth into this culture, and because we understand what's behind all the mess, all the problems in our world. It's these dark spiritual forces and it's these beasts. That's what's behind it. And we have a responsibility to stand up against that and to grow the kingdom of Jesus Christ while we are here on this earth. The kingdom is already, but not yet. It is something that is already here in the presence of Jesus Christ through His church, but it is also something that will be consummated, that will be completed when Jesus Christ comes, puts an end to human rebellion and spiritual rebellion, and brings about the millennium kingdom and eventually the new heavens and the new earth. So that's your breakdown of Daniel chapter 7, in particular those three images, the image of the beast, the image of the court, and the image of the kingdom. I hope you enjoyed the study. As I said, this is designed to stand alone. You could just listen to this episode and listen to nothing else. But I would encourage you, this will also, understanding Daniel 7 will also help you understand what we're going to be talking about as we move forward in the book of Revelation.